that they are trying to facilitate the fentanyl trade and fentanyl from coming into the country. But the irony, and my colleague from Texas, Mr. Fallon, said this at the end of his 5 minutes, is he questions whether or not the Biden administration is serious about addressing the problems at the border. Well, it's quite ironic because right now, this very day and for the last 5 weeks, the Biden administration, the White House, and Secretary Mayorkas have been negotiating with a bipartisan group of senators to actually address the problems at the border. But you know who hasn't been involved in that? House Republicans. And instead what they are doing, as you just heard from Ms. Green, is trying to impeach Secretary Mayorkas for his failure to address the border while he is negotiating to address the border. And then, even if there is a bipartisan agreement in the Senate, the Republican leadership in the House has already determined that it is dead on arrival. They haven't seen the agreement, but they just know that it's dead on arrival. Does that, Mr. Beer, sound to you like someone or some party or some group of people who are trying to address the problems at the border?
Look, this administration has been trying from day one to get attention of Congress to try to pass immigration legislation, and they've gotten no takers.
Because, am I correct, Mr. Beer, that the fundamental core problems that cause some of the issues at the border require legislative fixes? They cannot be done through solely executive action. Is that correct?
Absolutely. They need new authorities to deal with the legal immigration system in particular.
Now, Mr. Edlow, I know you ran USCIS, and you've testified about how the backlog of asylum applications is a significant problem because it incentivizes even those who may not qualify to try to come here because they would be able to stay for years. Is that a fair assessment of the concern about the backlog of the asylum applicants?
That was not what I was saying about the affirmative asylum applicants, but as far as defensive people coming across, yes, they get to come in, they'll eventually get work authorization. Actually, under some of these regulations, they get it very quickly.
Well, but regardless of when they get it, they apply for asylum, and it takes years, right? And so you would agree with me that fewer than 50% of asylum applicants are granted asylum when their case is finally heard. Is that right?
Again, I'm not sure. Are we talking about the people coming in from the border, or are you talking about total? Because those are different numbers.
Well, I'm talking about the total. But the point is that there's a backlog. And as the head of USCIS, do you think that 1,600 more asylum officers to process asylum applications would help to reduce the backlog and therefore not incentivize more people to come?
If those officers were going to be placed for affirmative asylum applications for people who have been in the pipeline for a number of years, yes. However, that is
because
not
you know what
what
was in the President Biden supplemental? $755 million for USCIS to hire 1,600 asylum officers to go through the backlog. Now, Mr. Homan, do you think that it would be helpful to hire additional CBP officers, Border Patrol agents, or border processing coordinators so Border Patrol agents can do their job and try to secure the border and fight drug trafficking and human trafficking coming over the border? Would those additional officers have helped you when you were heading that department?
Hiring more officers to process more quickly, release more quickly.
I'm not asking about what I asked. I asked separately about CBP officers, HSI officers, Border Patrol agents, security enforcement officers. Would that help to secure the border?
This is not a resource issue. It's a policy issue.
That's not my question. My question is, would it be helpful? Would it be helpful?
Of course, having more border patrol agents is always helpful.
Exactly. And yet, This Republican Party does not want to add $4.46 billion that was in the president's supplemental appropriations request to go to the Customs and Border Protection to fight the fentanyl trade, to fight human trafficking, to try to take away the American-made guns from the cartels who control both. And this
Just a
Republican
minute.
Party will
We're going to
not
have a hard
do
time here
anything.
because we are going
I yield back.
to, just so you know, we are going to wind up on the floor here, so we want to squeeze in as many people as possible. Mr. Cloud.
Hey, thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. As we know, the executive branch has one job, and that's to enforce the laws of the land, not to make the laws of the land. This administration has all but given up on securing the border, and now it's actually deploying resources to counter states like Texas that are actually doing the federal's job in doing their best effort to secure the borders. We talked to people on the ground. I was there just 2 weeks ago, and the way they described it, they said, right now, it's like you're holding a bucket in front of an open fire hydrant. And what our friends on the left want is more buckets. What you need to do is cap the fire hydrant. And what we've done and what we've seen the Biden administration do is turn our Customs and Border Protection into a Customs and Border Processing, and much to the disdain of many of the people who are there serving and doing their best effort to deal with the Biden administration. My district in South Texas has felt the consequences firsthand for years. Just recently, Goliad County law enforcement reported finding 16 different cartel stash sites, one of them the largest in the country at the time, connected to drug activity, human trafficking, or both. They found them on private property, and of course they were being operated without the owner's permission. Also in my district, just a few weeks ago, a 16-year-old girl was murdered in her own home by a man who had overstayed his visa and should have been subject to removal. We've seen, no doubt the border's been challenging for a while, but Trump was able to make a lot of headway and get as close as we've been for a while in securing our border. He succeeded where I would say the Biden administration failed, but that would assume that their goals were to actually secure the border. Mr. Homey, could you explain, because there's a lot of effort from this administration to blame Texas, to blame Congress, saying we need more money, we need more authorities. Could you explain the difference between the authorities at the Trump administration, the authorities and resources that the Trump administration had at their disposal versus the Biden administration?
Yeah, and of course, and you hit right on point your first statement. When we talk about more Border Patrol agents, of course, we could always use more Border Patrol agents, but not to carry buckets. More Border Patrol agents are only meaningful if we secure the border and let them do their national security job. But look, the difference is clear. I mean, under the Trump administration, illegal immigration was down to a 40, 45-year level, depending on what time frame you looked at. And he did it because the Remain in Mexico program, people can still claim asylum, but they're not going to be released in the United States until they have the hearing. We had the third safe country agreements with Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, that if you're really escaping fear and persecution from El Salvador and you get to another free country, haven't you escaped that fear and persecution, you should be claiming asylum there. Because it's not about asylum. We know most of the asylum claims on the southern border are fraudulent because most of them will get orders of removal. And the wall works. You know, people want to say the wall doesn't work. The wall works. The wall takes the most vulnerable people, women and children who can't get over that wall, takes them to a place where there isn't a wall, where Border Patrol's there to deal with the humanitarian issue. And lastly, I'll say about the men and women of the Border Patrol, if I may. I've seen videos in the last few days where people are going down the border, screaming at Border Patrol agents that they're racist, they're trafficking in women and children. There's only humanitarian group on that border are the men and women wearing green. These are patriots, they're heroes, they're the finest law enforcement officers in the world, and they're being attacked by the left and some on the right as being traffickers. These men and women, the morale's on the toilet. They're doing everything they can. They've saved thousands of lives every year. So for both sides, I saw a video this morning, it just agonized me that you want to pick on the men and women of Border Patrol who put their lives on the line every day to defend this nation. God bless the Border Patrol. I salute what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so the Biden administration, thank you for mentioning that. They are giving their best effort under tremendous circumstances and an administration that doesn't really support them. But to be clear, the Biden administration did not lose any authorities that the Trump administration had, right?
Remain in Mexico program has been found by the highest courts in the land to be legal. They could institute that tomorrow and it'd be a game changer.
And they have just as much, if not more, resources available at their disposal from what.
It's not a resource issue, it's a policy issue.
Yes.
If they change the policies and get back to the Trump-era policies, they could solve 85% of this problem.
Now, interestingly, a entire cottage industry surrounding this catastrophe has butted up, from processing to transporting, the NGOs that are happening. A lot's been made of family separation, and you've mentioned it, but if you can mention again, how many children has the Biden administration lost? And then could you speak to the lives lost on the journey as well, and the human side? I know I visited a facility in my district where 30 to 50% of the young women admitted to being assaulted along the journey.
Nearly 100,000 children are missing that this administration released to so-called sponsors we can't find. But we do know we found many working a midnight shift in meatpacking plants, many in forced labor, many in indentured servitude. We know that we've lost right around 1,700 aliens have died on U.S. soil making this trip. That's not counting the Darien Gap, which are thousands, Mexico and Central America. When you make promises, you can cross this border legally, you'll be released, you'll get work authorization, and you can't be removed because ICE can't remove somebody who's in the country illegally just for being here illegally. Secretary said that. When you make those types of promises, plus free health care, the most vulnerable people in the world are going to put themselves in harm's way with the cartels, and that's why record amount, not only Americans are dying from fentanyl, 112,000 last count, a record number of migrants are dying every day on the border. And as I said earlier, while we're here talking today, women are being sexually assaulted, and a child's going to die tonight because they think this border is open, and they're going to keep coming.
Thank you. I believe my time's up. Yield back.
Chair now recognize Mr. Condon from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Homan, you have said that you plan to lead the largest mass deportation operation in history. Is that your aspiration?
The largest illegal immigration crisis on the border is going to have to result in the largest deportation operation because most of them will get order removal.
I'm just using your words. You stand by that?
Yes, absolutely.
What is that? Does that mean that you're telling the American public? I'm just trying to understand. If they're 10, 11, 12 million undocumented, I don't know, how many do you think that any one of those folks, if you're in charge, is going to face potential deportation?
I think if you're in the country illegally, you need to be concerned because you're in the country illegally.
So you're telling basically any American today, or any undocumented person here today, 11 million, that your goal, if you get power again, is you're going to lead the largest mass deportation of all of them, correct?
The biggest illegal alien crisis on the southern border. Millions of people crossing.
just
No,
don't-
you got to put it in perspective. If you believe in due process and they have the right to claim asylum, they have the right to due process and see a court, when those final orders are issued, if they're not executed, then what the hell are we doing?
I just
Shut down the
want
immigration
people
court.
to know what happens if you come into power. You've been pretty candid about it, and
Yes.
so I think it's important for people to understand. Now, I assume that you reject this great replacement theory, correct?
The numbers are the numbers. So
No, this conspiracy theory of great replacement, that somehow there's an intentional effort to replace white Americans with Americans who look like me. You reject that theory, correct?
yes, I don't think it's about replacement.
Mr. Edlow, do you clearly reject the great replacement theory?
Yes, that's not what this is about.
Would you reject Charlie Kirk, who has said that the great replacement theory is something that more Republicans should embrace? Would you reject his characterization?
I'm not aware of his characterization.
If he's advocating for the great replacement
I
theory.
can only speak to myself. I'm not.
Would you reject any person who advocates for the great replacement theory?
I'm not.
Mr. Homan, would you reject Charlie Kirk's?
I don't know what his intention is. I mean,
Would you commit to not going on the Charlie Kirk show again if he's advocating the great replacement theory? And what Charlie Kirk has said is that he was pleased that Vivek Ramaswamy finally talked about the great replacement theory on the campaign trail. And the great replacement theory is basically that there's some intentional idea of replacing white Americans with brown and black Americans for additional votes, or the diluting of America. You've rejected that.
I would have to have a discussion with Charlie Kirk and find out what he means by what he says.
But you reject the theory, correct?
It depends what his meaning of his theory is.
What
What does he mean by that?
what
I mean,
me-
I read stuff in the media every day about me that's not true. I mean,
What is it that you would think is a reasonable view of it?
again, I don't think what's happening is replacing white Americans. I think it's bringing in a large group of people who the left thinks will be future Democratic voters, or going to change them out with the census numbers, going to change the seats in the House and all that's done. But I'd have to talk to Mr. Kirk and find out what his views are and what he means by.
But you believe there's an intentional effort by who to try to get more Democratic voters? I mean, what is it that your belief is?
I've been asked why I think they support open borders and bringing millions of people in. I, as I specified earlier, you were not here, I don't understand why anybody would want to unsecure a border. I don't see any downside in a secure border. So there has to be some sort of political.
The last question on this is that just your speculation, or do you have any? I mean, that's a very serious charge to launch on.
It's just one option out of many. Do I have direct evidence is happening?
And who do you
No.
think is doing it? The Democratic Party operatives or other people? I mean, who's leading this, in your view?
You know what? I think you need to ask the administration, why did you open the border and why do you want millions of people crossing the border and be released in the United States? That's a question for them.
Mr. Byer, do you have any sense that this administration doesn't believe in secure borders? And what would be the top 3 policies that you would implement to secure the border?
Well, first of all, this administration is removing record numbers of people, and in fact, a higher percentage of people who cross the border than were removed in 2019 and 2020. So the idea that they have no interest in this, they don't want to remove people. I mean, if they did that, why do they have cages? Why do they have all the things that you've talked about? It's logistical issues. Congress has funded 34,000 beds, and that's how many people arrive in 4 days at the border. That's why people are being released. The solution to this is legal immigration. We need to resolve how we want people to come to this country. Have a conversation about that. And once we agree that people are good, immigrants contribute to this country, then we can have a conversation about how should they come? What's the way? What's the mechanism? Because right now there isn't any for the people who are showing up at our border.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognize Mr. Timmons from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out that this is the United States Congress, this is the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, and we're having a hearing titled The Biden Administration's Regulatory and Policymaking Efforts to Undermine U.S. Immigration Law. I've heard from my colleagues across the aisle a number of different lines of logic surrounding this hearing, and I just don't understand where they're coming from. In the last 3 years, we've had millions and millions of non-Americans cross the southern border illegally claiming asylum. Mr. Homan, what is the number that you use? Because I've heard $5, $6, $7 million in the last 3 years. 5, 6, 7 million people in the last 3 years. What's the number you use?
Encounters?
Correct.
We're just short of 8 million.
And that's, you're using a term. What is that term?
Encounters.
Encounters.
Come across the border.
So you're assuming how many, you can just estimate how many people have been released into the country?
We know at least 2.4 million.
And how many gotaways do you think there are? How many people did we?
1.9 million known gotaways.
Okay, so let's go back. Before Biden was sworn in, Trump had a number of policies in place. Remain in Mexico. He was actively constructing a physical barrier across the southern border. He was using technology to surveil the southern border, and the Border Patrol was funded, and they were able to manage their caseload to a fairly good degree under his administration. Is that true to say? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So day one, Biden gets sworn into office, and he signs an executive order ending Remain in Mexico. He altered the asylum and the parole laws to make them more favorable. He enticed people all over the planet to go to Mexico, to then cross the southern border illegally and claim asylum for whatever they think is a credible fear, which that definition is constantly changed. But the fact is, the Border Patrol doesn't have the ability to say that's not credible fear. You get a court date years down the line, and we spend our taxpayer dollars to send these millions of people all over our country. And Heritage estimates that the cost annually of that is $400 billion. I actually think it's far higher, because when these people are living in our country, they are using our healthcare system, they're using our education system, they're using our infrastructure, and we don't really have a good estimate. I think it's probably closer to $750 billion annually. What do you think the cost of Biden's policies are, taxpayer dollars-wise, annually in this country?
I have no idea.
Would you agree it's
really-
hundreds of billions of
Oh,
dollars?
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And your point
And-
is asylum at the border. You're exactly right. There's massive asylum fraud going on. Even the Democratic expert next to me has said they're coming in for a job. They're coming in for a job that doesn't qualify for asylum.
And I just want to point out, I am fully in favor of immigration. We have $34 trillion in debt. The only way we can solve that is by growing the economy, which involves people coming to this country. But they got to come through the front door. And I was in Eagle Pass, Texas 2 weeks ago, and as we were giving a press conference, a family of 4 almost drowned. And they were saved and they did not die. But just 2 days ago, people drowned in the river because they're coming in illegally, because they're not coming to a port of entry. So we have a major problem. It's a crisis. And the costs of these policies are really, it's hard to even put a number on it financially, but then you have lives. You have lives. As you've talked about, the number one cause of death for Americans age 18 to 45 is fentanyl overdose. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in the last 3 years. We've already gone over the financial costs, taxpayer dollars. The last thing I want to say is just misery. The amount of misery of people coming in this country illegally, whether it's because of indentured servitude, because the cartels are profiting tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars off of this, it's just awful. And all of this is because of President Biden signing his damn name. All he's got to do is sign it again. Reinstate remain in Mexico. We were in the Del Rio border sector with the head of the border sector, and he said, if we reinstate remain in Mexico, if this President Biden reinstates remain in Mexico, 75% of the problem will be gone. And that's why we're here. We're here because our country is drowning in insane amounts of illegal immigration. I'm going to read you a quote, and then I'm going to let you guess who it's from. I don't see an ending to this. I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy our city. We have a $12 billion deficit that we're going to have to cut even more. Every service in this city is going to be impacted, all of us. You think that was from somewhere on a border town in Texas?
New York City mayor.
New York City mayor. It's the New York City mayor. Mr. President, you got to sign your damn name, reinstate remain in Mexico, solve this problem. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Porter from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Republicans seem, as Mr. Timmons just did, to acknowledge that immigration can benefit our economy, and they seem to say the problem is unlawful arrival. So let me take them for a minute at their word, and most Americans agree with this, by the way, that lawful immigration is a boon to our country and to our economy. Let's understand why, and then let's look at why that isn't the solution to this problem. Mr. Beer, is the U.S. population growth rate declining?
It's down 90% from its historic highs.
Okay. Can you have a growing economy and a declining birth rate in the long term?
You can have economic growth with a declining birth rate, but it's more difficult.
Okay. And I think we can all look at examples around the world of countries that are struggling with this. So our population will start to decline in just a few years, in 2030, if current immigration and demographic trends continue, correct?
That's right.
So if population does begin to decline, what are some likely harms to the U.S. economy?
Well, look, you look at the Social Security system, if we do not have another 30 million workers available by 2034, then the Social Security Administration expects we will have, then we're facing a situation where taxes are going to have to go up a lot in order to fund the system, and that's going to be a catastrophic hit to taxpayers or to Social Security benefits, one or the other. So that's one example. Obviously, economic growth is going to be impacted as more people retire. We've heard about the employment rate going down. Well, that's because people are retiring, not because fewer people are working. If you look at the prime age employment rate, it's high, but that's not enough to make up for all the retirees that are no longer working.
And Mr. Beer, collectively, even if we just look at Social Security, forget collectively, if we just focus on Social Security, we are talking about, in the next few decades, trillions of dollars of shortfalls that could effectively decimate Social Security.
Yes, absolutely. You're talking about over $12 trillion deficit in the short term.
Okay, so then let's say we agree that we need lawful immigration. And I hear our witnesses and our colleagues on the other side saying, well, lawful immigration, I'm for that. I'm just not for unlawful immigration. So let's talk about this. Of the people who apply, who use the system, and they follow the rules, which I think Americans think we should, they apply for a green card. What percentage of them get it?
That's 3%, so 97% do not get one.
3%. I hear all the time from people that they would like people who want to seek a life in this country to follow the rules and, quote, get in line. But there is no line at all for many, many countries. Can you explain that?
Right, so some countries, you can apply for the lottery, right? If you're from a country without a large legal immigration flow already to the United States. But for many countries, where Mexico, India, China, Central American countries, Venezuela now, they're banned from even applying for that green card lottery. So there's no direct path for them. If they don't have a U.S. citizen family member in the United States, they're out of luck unless they are extremely highly skilled individual, PhD, master's degree in STEM, has a chance, again, through the H-1B lottery. So we got lotteries on top of lotteries even for the highest skilled people.
So I think this is a really important point for the American people to understand, and really important for Democrats to stake out here. What is our position on immigration? And it is that immigration is a huge benefit to our economy, from which we all benefit. Whether we are generations past from coming to this country or new immigrants, every American benefits from a strong, stable, globally competitive economy, and we have to have legal immigration to get there. That's platform one, in my view. The second platform is we want people to follow the rules, to have an orderly system. But we have to be honest, despite the efforts of the Biden administration, there is still, because Congress has failed, Republicans and Democrats have failed our economy and the American people because we have not created an orderly system. You cannot wait in line if there is no line. You cannot take your turn if we don't provide a chance to get to the front, to get a chance to apply. So the fundamental problem here is we have a broken immigration system. And what we're seeing in terms of unlawful immigration, we shouldn't be blaming people seeking a better life. We ought to be willing to look in the mirror in this body, in the Capitol, and take responsibility for our failure to update the immigration system and to create an orderly way to boost our economy. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The failure in our immigration system is a wide open southern border. There are folks who are waiting in a so-called line. As Mr. Beyer said, most countries do not have a line. They have a lottery, and they're banned from even applying. We have the most generous system in the world for bringing in legal immigrants into our country. And it's so interesting, fascinating to hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle debate this and counter every other argument that they have in their policies. They're saying they want economic growth, and the only way to get so is through indentured servitude, is through putting moms and their children in the hands of cartel, who, Mr. Homan, you have said that it's the cartel who have operational control at our southern border. Is that not correct, sir?
They absolutely do.
So we are going to risk putting lives in the hands of the cartel to bolster our economy. My colleague just asked if our birth rate was declining here in America, and the answer was yes. Well, of course it is. We have nearly 1 million abortions in our country a year, over 60 million abortions since this has been illegal. And if that's an issue, well, then we need to address that. If we want an incline in our birth rate, well, let's look at our own country first, rather than putting folks in the hands of the cartel and putting their lives in danger so they can do, as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say, pick our fruit, pick our crops. Aren't the folks who are coming here to seek the American dream deserving of the American dream, or are they only deserving to clean our toilets, fold our beds in our hotels, the sheets, and pick our crops? I think the American dream is worth much more than that, and that's why we are the most generous nation in the world when it comes to legal immigration, accepting nearly 1 million legal immigrants each year. Now, Mr. Homan, as someone who oversaw a significant downturn in illegal border crossings under the Trump administration, what do you believe has been the biggest driver in skyrocketing increase of illegal immigration through our southern border under the Biden administration?
The Biden administration's policies, catch and release. They know they cross the border illegally, they'll be processed in record time because the administration keeps sending more resources to the border, not to secure the border, but to process and release.
Right.
As long as they know they can cross the border, be released, get flown or transported to the city of their choice at taxpayers' dime, get lodging, health care, 3 squares a day, they're going to keep coming because there's no consequence.
Thank you, Mr. Homan. Now, in Colorado, we've seen fentanyl deaths absolutely explode, and thousands of illegal aliens shipped into my state of Colorado. How do you think that the American family has been most impacted